In case you didn't know, the Lotus Evora ticks every box for a classic petrolhead. It's a mid-engine manual sports car that's relatively light and has an exhilarating sound. Moreover, now that prices dropped under $100,000, the Evora offers tremendous value for money and is basically the perfect weekend car. However, we can't really talk about the Evora without bringing up the Cayman. It's the benchmark in its class and offers many of the same qualities as the Evora. It also has a mid-engine layout, a manual option, great sound, and also offers good value for money. Now when it comes to value for money, there are obviously two components, the value and the money. We will not discuss the value part in this video. There are a ton of excellent reviews out there that compare the driving dynamics of the Cayman to the Evora. Rather, we will talk about the money part. You see, the cars might be close when it comes to performance, but this doesn't necessarily translate to the value development. In this video you'll get to know everything about Evora values, how they develop during the winter, and how all of this compares to the Cayman. We will first familiarize ourselves with the Evora market and then compare everything to the Cayman. Over here we have the US Evora market of March, and you can see that the Evora is a rare car. There are currently only 56 cars for sale and the GT model accounts for more than half of this. This is followed by the base, the S and the 400 model. The Evora has been with us for more than 10 years, so you can see that prices are all over the place. Prices for the base version sit between $50,000 and $60,000, while the S sits more at $70,000. And this is followed by the 400 that costs around $80,000. The GTs are the most expensive. Prices start at $90,000 for cars with just over 5,000 miles and go up to $120,000 for brand new cars. And naturally, the cars at the top end of this range are fully kitted out. Now what's interesting about this GT market is that there are quite a lot of new cars for sale, 15 to be exact. If I add the split to the graph, so we have the new GTs in purple and the used ones in red, we can also see that the new ones are hovering mostly between $110,000 and $120,000, whereas the used ones sit between $90,000 and $100,000. So we know now how the Evora market looks from a model year perspective and what the price point is for each model type. However, this is the first time that an Evora features on the channel, so let's give it a proper introduction and also have a look at the depreciation per 1,000 miles driven. This namely tells us how much the Evora loses per 1,000 miles, and it will be interesting to compare this to the Cayman later in the video. Unfortunately though, the market size for the S and the 400 is too small to get a reliable estimate, so I will focus on the base and the GT market. Over here we have the GT in orange and the base model in blue. And look at that, what a difference! We can see that the base model has an extremely low depreciation rate of only minus 0.3% per 1,000 miles driven. And this might be one of the lowest rates that I've seen on the channel. This is also clearly visible in the graph, as the price doesn't decrease so much when the mileage increases. However, this rate might fluctuate in reality as we have limited data. The shaded area shows the uncertainty in the estimate, and you can see that it's fairly large for the cars between 10 and 25,000 miles. But things are a bit different in the GT segment. There are a lot of new cars for sale, and this shows up in the depreciation rate. It's minus 1.8%, and that's on the high side, but nothing worrisome given the number of new cars in the market. The rate is high in the first 1,000 miles and then drops, resulting in a high average. Splitting the graph between the used and the new ones reveals that the rate is with minus 1.1% a lot lower for the used cars. It's on the high side but not extraordinary high, especially if you take into account that the used car market is relatively new. Alright, but what about the value development? We've seen a tremendous increase in car values during the last year, but we've also seen that more recently prices started to stabilize. This is in line with what we can see in the Evora market. Over here we can see the value development during last winter for the GTs and the 400s, split by the new and the used cars. For the other model variants I unfortunately don't have enough data. Now then, we can see that prices didn't change during the last 7 months. A new GT is slightly more expensive now than 7 months ago, but this difference can just be the result of a change in spec level. This price increase over here is then also not statistically confirmed, and this means that it could be the result of chance. And the same applies to the used GT market. Prices literally didn't change during the last 7 months. The only market segment where we can see a price increase is the 400 one. Yet, the market size is so small that it's difficult to rely on this price trend. The median mileage, for example, decreased, and this can explain the price increase that we see over here. So to sum it up, Evora values were rock solid during the last 7 months, but this doesn't mean that nothing happened in the market. The GT market saw a significant shift. Over here we can see the development of the market characteristics. We have the supply, median mileage and median model year development. Now as a start I would like to focus on the red and the purple lines. These show the development for the new and used GT market, and if we look at the supply graph, we can see that supply levels dropped a lot in that market segment. There used to be 126 cars for sale versus only 36 now, and we can see that this drop mainly results from a drop in the new cars. We can't be 100% sure why there was such a big drop, but it's likely that many of these new cars were sold. And that's quite a high number for such a niche car as the Evora. We need to remember though that production stopped, meaning that the supply level is unlikely to increase. Now besides the change in the supply levels, these graphs also highlight that the used GT market consists out of almost brand new cars. You can see that the median mileage is still under 5,000 miles and that most cars are from 2020. And with that, I think it's time to do a little summary of what we just saw. We had an in-depth look at the Evora market and saw that prices vary a lot depending on the age of a car. That's no surprise. We also saw that the market for the older Evora is very small and that this makes them rare. We then transitioned to the depreciation per 1,000 miles, and this revealed that it's very low for the base model but slightly elevated for the used GTs. Yet, we also saw that values have been stable as there were no significant price changes during the last 7 months. Now the big question is of course how everything that we just looked at, so the prices, the mileage sensitivity and the value development over time, compares to the Cayman market. Porsches are known for their strong residuals, and this might compensate the higher price tag that you need to pay for one. The depreciation per 1,000 miles can be lower and the value development can be more favorable, something that would aid the Cayman when it comes to offering value for money. But let's start simple and compare the prices of the Cayman to the Evora. Over here we have both markets, and don't worry, I'm aware that there are a lot of colors. Let's tackle the Evora models one by one and see to what Cayman models they compare. If we start with the base Evora, we can see that prices are similar to the 987.2S Cayman and that there's also a significant overlap to the older 981S and base models. And I think this makes sense. They're more or less direct competitors and this shows in the pricing. Evora S prices however push things up a notch as they enter the range of the Cayman R and the older GTSs. Especially in comparison to the GTS, prices might be troublesome. The GTS is a lot newer and, dare I say it, in terms of value maybe the better car here. If we move on then to the Evora 400, we can see that it's difficult to make a comparison as the market size is extremely small, but it seems to be aligned with the GTS models. Now finally, when we move on to the GT, things get interesting. A new GT is priced between $110,000 and $120,000, and this is in the same range as a 4-liter GTS or a low mileage 981 GTS. It also shows that a comparison to the 718 GT4 isn't fair. They are $30,000 more expensive. Now when we look at the used GTs, we can see that they're quite a bit cheaper than the new ones and that this is something that we don't see to the same extent in the Porsche market. A 2020 GT is with $95,000 around $10,000 cheaper than a new equivalent. The drop in the Porsche market is much lower. It does however mean that a used GT enters the price range of a 718 Cayman S and the low mileage 981 GTS. And looking purely at prices, I think that this is where the GT makes a lot of sense. So we spent now quite some time to understand the price levels and we figured out how the ones of the Evora compare to the ones of the Cayman. But like I mentioned before, this is just one part of the story. We also need to have a look at the mileage sensitivity and the value development over time. So that's what we will do now. But before we do so, if you like this video, please support the channel by clicking on the like button down below. Thank you. We'll start with the mileage sensitivity and we'll only look at the GT model. It's difficult for the rest of the Evora market as there's not enough data. Over here we have in green the 718 GT4, in red the 981 GT4, in orange the 4-liter GTS, in brown the Evora GT, in blue the 718 GTS and in purple the 981 GTS. And this reveals that the mileage sensitivity is quite high indeed for the GT model. The 718 Cayman GT4 sits at minus 0.8%, the 981 Cayman GT4 at minus 0.6%, the 4-liter GTS at minus 0.9%, but you can see that there's a lot of uncertainty in that estimate, and the 718 GTS at minus 0.4%. Finally, we have the 981 GTS, and that has a very low rate of minus 0.3%. It's actually an excellent score. Like we saw before, it's minus 1.8% for the Evora GT, and that's a lot higher than for the Caymans. Now a big reason for this is the high share of new cars in that market. You can see that there are hardly any new cars for sale in the other markets, so let's remove them and make this a fair comparison. This namely reveals that when it comes to the used cars, the Evora GT indeed has a slightly higher mileage sensitivity, but it's not far behind the Porsches. The GT's rate is with minus 1.1%, a bit higher than the minus 0.8% of the 718 GT4, but that's not a difference I would worry about if you're spending this kind of money. Naturally, the rate is still a lot higher than for the cars that have a higher mileage. We saw that the 718 GTS sits at minus 0.4% and that the 981 GTS sits at minus 0.3%. So to sum it up, the mileage sensitivity might be slightly higher in the Evora market, but I wouldn't see this as a deal breaker. Especially when you make a like-for-like comparison, we saw that the differences are only minor. The rate for a used Evora GT is slightly higher than for a 718 GT4 and a lot higher than for higher mileage Caymans. Yet I see no reason as to why the curve of the Evora wouldn't converge to the same rate when the mileages increase. Usually it's so that the higher the mileage, the lower the rate. And with that, let's have a look at the final comparison, the one of the value development over time. Over here we can namely see a difference. We have from top to bottom the 718 GT4, the 4-liter GTS, the GT, the 718 GTS and the 981 GTS. And this only includes the used cars. Now when you study this graph for a moment, you notice that all the Porsches trended up slightly during the last months, whereas the Evoras didn't move. You can see for example that the median price of a GT was exactly the same as the price for a 981 GT4 in August of last year. 981 GT4s however continue to trend up and are now around $7,000 more expensive than a GT. Therefore, from a value perspective, the GT is lagging behind a bit. Nevertheless, when we compare the Evora not to Caymans with a similar price, but to Caymans with a similar model year and mileage, so the 4-liter GTS and the 718 GT4, we can also see that the GT falls behind slightly, especially compared to the GT4 market where values still increased by 4%. Porsche is then also well known for the creation of scarcity around their GT products, and the difference in the price development might just be a reflection of that. And with that, let's wrap up and conclude. Does the Evora offer better value for money than a Cayman from a money perspective? Well, yes, but only when you compare apples to apples and oranges to oranges. So what do I mean with that? The Evora GT market consists out of almost brand new cars, and if you want an equivalent new Cayman, you will end up with a Cayman GT4 or a 4-liter GTS. They are, however, respectively $20,000 and $40,000 more expensive on the used market. And it of course all depends on what you value in a car, but from a monetary perspective, the pricing of a used Evora GT is attractive. Even if the Evora has a slightly higher depreciation rate, it's unlikely that the value drop will be so high that it compensates for the $20,000 or $40,000 what you would have needed to spend for an equivalent Cayman. There is however a flip side to all of this. One of the reasons for this big gap between used 718 GT4s, 4-liter GTSs and the Evora GTs is that the GT loses quite a bit in the beginning of its lifetime. We saw that in the depreciation per 1000 miles curve. Therefore, when you're looking at a brand new car, the Cayman might be the better option. Now all of this is based on a model year and mileage comparison. Things are very different when you compare an Evora to a Cayman based on pricing alone. This namely brings the 981 GT4 into play. Yes, this is an older car with a higher mileage, but also a car that exactly because of those things is less likely to drop significantly in price. And we can say the same for the 981 GTS. For the Evora GT, however, I expect that the price drop will be larger, as the mileage sensitivity is simply higher. Moreover, the Emira will hit the market in the fall, and this might result in some extra price pressure. So, to sum it up, does the Evora GT offer great value for money compared to a Cayman? In my opinion, yes, but only when you look at a used Evora GT and compare that to an equivalently used 4-liter GTS or 718 GT4. In all other scenarios, the answer might be less black and white and might favor the Cayman. Finally, we need to keep in mind that this was only my first look at the Evora market, but that I will continue to update this data so we can get a better picture of the price developments in that market. It will be interesting to see how things develop when the first Emiras will be delivered. And with that we arrived at the end of this video. Now if you enjoyed this data-driven way of analyzing car values, but would have liked to see the analysis for a different car, let me know in the comment section for which car you would like to see an analysis. Once there are enough requests for a certain car, I will make a video about it. Also don't forget then to subscribe and to click on the notification bell so you get notified when your requested analysis goes live. As always, thank you for watching and I hope to see you next week for a new video.